Hey there, how you doing? I'm back today with another album review, and as you may know, I typically review metal albums, and today I am reviewing a particular release that may or may not be considered metal depending on your opinions and who you are and your musical tastes, which is sort of something different and something I thought was really interesting about this release. Now, here you have it. This is the Blood Divine's second and final full-length album titled Mystica. Now, this album came out in 1997, and was a follow-up to their first release, which was called Awaken. And it's quite different from its predecessor, which is sort of a nice, interesting breath of fresh air while listening to this release. If you're not familiar with Awaken, or you haven't watched my previous review for that album, the sound and overall style of that first release carried a lot of remnants from doom metal and from heavy metal sounds in general. And this album is quite a big step away from that. So whether or not you like the first album may or may not be a good indicator of whether you like this release. And also, this hardly feels like a metal album at all, which is quite different and quite unique in its own way. Now, in terms of sound, what you get on this album is maybe two main influences. Influence number one is sort of a heavy, almost thrashy, but not too thrashy metal sound with 1970s style keyboard rock influences in there, which is quite interesting and sort of cool because it's probably not what was mainly popular when this came out in 1997. And the other thing you get is sort of more almost ballads, but sort of progressive gothic styled rock tracks, such as Central Ecstasy and the album's Conclusion Prayer. Now these combine sort of a great sense of gothic style atmosphere in a non-traditional way. And although this album does contain trace of metal, it's very hard to say, for me at least, if this feels like a metal album or more of a experimental rock gesture, which is one of the things I really like about it. It's very hard to categorize. It doesn't sound like what was popular at the time. And it's sort of like an interesting piece of musical history. I'd like to especially note that the Blood Divine as a band was only around for a couple of short years, and this was their last two full-length albums, so this is like sort of a blink of time and then the band's gone. Now, in terms of the quality of tracks on here, I can say with utmost sincerity that the quality of the music on this album is actually quite high, and the music overall is very enjoyable. All the tracks, the only ones I think could have been improved a little bit were, Mystica, the title track, and the other song that I think could have been done a little bit better was I Believe, just because the writing in those tracks wasn't quite as strong as on the others. Now, this isn't an album you listen to for, technical music or, awesome guitar playing. Not to say that the musicians playing on this album are weak in any sort of way, but the key factor and the key point that keeps me coming back to this release is that the songwriting is quite good. The lyrics are well written. It has a particular style and flow to it that sort of gives off a particular message. It's like this album to me feels like a piece of artwork that is probably way underappreciated, considering that this is something you'll not find in any popular music store anymore. It's completely off the new CD market as far as I'm concerned. In terms of finding this, you're looking at eBay or CD store, and that's pretty much it. Now, the album overall flows quite well, and there's enough variation between the two main styles on the album to keep it sort of fresh, interesting. And it has quite a few things that I think they really worked on from the first album. Not to say that it was bad, but obviously there's always room for improvement. One thing I like that they improved on from the first release is that the album closed on a much more positive and musically more well-written note than the first release. Fear of a Lonely World and Prayer, the two final tracks on this release, are actually probably my two favorites. Actually, I always find it's a cool bonus when you really like an album, you know what to expect, and all of a sudden it gets better right at the end. And that's what they did, and I have quite a lot of respect for that. And there's a good amount of variety here. The album keeps you guessing a little bit between the different tracks. Although they don't step too far away from their sound, they keep it fresh and interesting throughout the release. So the other thing that they did that was sort of interesting is they put Visions Part 2 on here to tie back to the first album. Since, the music is quite different, it's nice that they sort of made a subtle reference to the first release. Overall, The Blood Divine has become one of my favorite bands from the 1990s, and unfortunately one of the ones that isn't really around anymore. It's quite a shame. Now, this release was followed up in 2002 with a compilation called Bride's Pantheon Dreams, but this is the last release that really had a significant amount of new material on it. So, enjoy this album. It's a piece of musical history. It's a well-written album. It contains a variety of songs, and sort of artistic styles that were put into it. Overall, I have to say that this is, one of the best written albums that I've heard in my lifetime. One of the most underappreciated, and one of the ones that you should seek out and find if you are into, classic doom metal, anything by Darren White, anything that's different, or if you just like to hear new types of sounds. Because this is not an album that sounds like any other release that any band that I'm familiar with has ever produced. So, all in all, check it out. The Blood Divine, Mystica. Made in 1997, but still good to this very day, and a truly unforgettable album. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.